Can you describe this drawing of like how ancient people, especially those who are writing our Bible and the creation accounts, how they viewed our world?
It's so fascinating to me because if you read Genesis 1 literally, which I certainly try to do, well, what you end up with is God on the second day separates the waters from the waters, and he uses something solid to do that. And the Hebrew word for it is the rakia. I like the King James translation. They describe it as a firmament, which is something that's firm, something that's solid. So
Mm.
basically what they're thinking of is that there's this dome that goes overhead, and that's what supports this upper ocean that was above us. And what ancient people, I mean, all ancient peoples understood that this was the way that the world was structured. What they argued about was what was the dome made of. And so, for example, if you read in some of the intertestamental literature, you'll see where some people say that it was made out of crystal, and some people will say that it's made out of metal, and some people say that it's made out of porcelain. And you go, well, why would they think this? Well, it's crystal because you can see the waters, or maybe it's metal because the word rakia comes from this word that has to do with hammering out metal. Or how about porcelain? Well, it's because that's what you make bowls out of. You make them out of
Mm.
clay. Josephus talks about how the reason that they built the Tower of Babel was so they could make their way all the way up to the Rakia and then dig into it and figure out what it
Mm.
was made of. And so this is the way everybody thinks about the way the world is structured. And they also, and this is it's also there in Genesis 1, they understood that the sun, moon, and stars were on this side of the waters. So they're embedded up in the dome, and you look at it and you go, well, that's the craziest structure of the universe I've ever heard of. And I argue that no, it's not. This is what the world looks like. When we're kindergartners and we draw a
Hmm.
landscape, we draw a yellow sun with a blue background. Now, it may be that we draw the limit of our atmosphere at 50 miles and the sun is 93 million miles away, but to the naked eye, what it looks like is there's a sun with a blue background. And it's obvious why that blue background has to be water. Well, it's because it's blue. It's blue for the same reason that the ocean is blue, because this is something that's full of water. This is where the rain comes from. I mean, we understand that the clouds get their waters from evaporation. They didn't understand that. They assumed that it's these windows of heaven that continue to restock them. And so this is their structure of the ancient world. And that's the picture that I have on my workbench is this picture of the rakia that's there with the sun, moon, and stars. It, it describes the world the way a person without Galileo's telescope would understand what the world looked like. And it stays as the understanding of the world really all the way up until just about Copernicus, because people continue to have these ideas of these spheres that are there. The planets are in different spheres. The stars are in a separate set of spheres. The heaven of heavens is in a different one. This is just the way people looked at the world.
And I thought it interesting too that within this dome, and certainly in Genesis 1, we see that there are these two lights, the two lights, one guarding the day, one at the night. And you point out that, well, obviously the moon isn't a light in the same way the sun is a light. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's one of these additional elements of how they're describing the world in terms of how it would look to them. So it is a form of science. You're observing the world, you're seeing what it looks like to you and explaining it. It just may not be the way that we understand the world to look today. But they imagined that the moon produced its own light. And so when you look, for example, in the Gospels, and it talks about, in those days, the sun will not give its light, the moon will not give its light, and it says, and the stars will fall from the heavens. Well, uh, there, this is just a cavalcade of different things that aren't exactly, the way that we understand science today. The moon doesn't actually give its own light. It's just a big mirror because of, its selenium content that's in its surface. It's very reflective. And so it can be so bright that sometimes you go out at night and you can see your shadow from the moonlight, except it's not really the moon's light. It's just a reflected light from the sun. And truthfully, even the idea that the moon gives its light is not quite as problematic as the notion that that the stars will fall from the heavens.
Mm.
If we understand these as shooting stars, oh sure, here comes a little grain of dust that our atmosphere is burning up as it passes through. Well, that's fine. It's just not what they meant when they spoke about this in the Bible. They understood this to be the stars. Well, we now know that the stars are massive and ferocious. There's the biggest star they've ever discovered. This star called UY Scuti. If you put it where the sun is, its perimeter is where the orbit of Jupiter is.
Oh,
If that
wow.
if that falls and hits us, it's going to hurt.
Yeah.
So it's this notion that they're describing the world the way that it looks. We just know that it doesn't look quite the same or to us today because we've benefited from a lot of scientific instrumentation that's been brought along. But truth be told, even today, if I look up at the sky and see these stars, I still look up at the stars and kind of misperceive the way that
Mm.
they look. They look for all the world to me like they exist in a bowl. It's almost like it's a flat plane. Like I could look at Orion and I get into my head this notion that I could get on a really speedy rocket ship and fly out, and I could look at the stars of Orion along their sides and see how they're all lined up. The truth is, two of the stars, Betelgeuse and Rigel, they are 600 light years apart, not side to
Oh,
side, but in depth from us.
wow. Wow.
They just look to us as if they're in a flat plane. If I were describing the world today based on my own naked eye observation, I would come up with a kind of description that sounds very similar to what they had in the Bible.
Hey, thank you so much for watching this video clip from the Delgado podcast. To get more videos just like this, simply subscribe here on YouTube. Take care.